Hello everyone, welcome back to Teaching the Bible. I'm your host, Michael Kotch. Teaching the Bible is a weekly television series that teaches the main events that take place in the Bible as we move forward through the Bible week by week. So let's get to what we covered so far, and it'll catch us up to speed on where we're moving. So far in the first episode, we learned about how God created everything in 6 God days. He created the heavens, he created the earth, he created man and woman on the earth. The first man and woman's name was Adam and Eve. And at one point, Adam and Eve decided to rebel against God, to go against something that he told them not to do, which was to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Satan came and told them that if they do that, they would become like God, which is what caused Satan to fall. Satan wanted to be like God, so he rebelled against them, and he tempted them to pretty much do a similar thing. Well, they didn't become like God. They did go against what God said, but they didn't become like God. Satan lied, and now sin entered the world by their disobedience to God, or possibly even rebellion against God. Next, we heard about Adam and Eve had children. They had several, but the first two that we heard were Cain and Abel. And Cain was as he grew up, he became a farmer or tiller of the land. Abel was a shepherd. They brought gifts to God because at this time, God was still talking to people in person. He would appear to people and speak to them in person. I don't know if it was face-to-face, but he would speak to them in person. And that would end, as we will see when we get to the events of Moses. So God was speaking to Cain and Abel, person to person, and because God took care of them, they brought offerings and gifts to God. For whatever reason, God accepted Abel's gift, but he did not accept Cain's gift because there's something wrong with Cain's gift, and Cain knew that, and he gave it to him anyways. Cain got angry at God. God said to Cain, "Cain, why are you angry? You know that if you do well, I will accept you. I'll accept what you offer me, but you know that if you don't, that I won't. So why are you angry about this? You know you did something wrong." And he said, "But listen, Cain, I got to warn you, sin is crouching at the door waiting to get you, but you must rule over it." Well, Cain didn't rule over it. The next thing that we hear was Cain was talking with his brother Abel in the field, and we don't know why, but for some unspecified reason, Cain killed his brother Abel. So the first 4 people in the Bible, already a mess with sin. Adam and Eve disobeyed God, potentially tried to rebel against him to become like him, which was forbidden. And then their sons, Cain killed Abel. So what we learned after that is people continued to reproduce. Adam and Eve had more children. We hear about Seth and other children. Cain had children, and the world over time began to fill up with people. Well, sin was wreaking havoc with the world, the first version of the world. It says in the Bible that the thoughts of man became nothing but evil continually. All he did was think evil things. All he did was do evil things. Sin completely polluted them and ruined them. So God decided, I have to start over. I have to start over mankind. Mankind is completely destroyed by sin. But he found one good man, and his name was Noah. God said that Noah was blameless and upright, and he walked with God. So God decided, he talked to Noah, and he told Noah, I want to repopulate the earth with your offspring because everybody else is so sinful. And Noah agreed. So God instructed Noah to build this big boat called an ark, and God sent all the animals to him, one male, one female. He loaded his family up in the ark. God sealed the door. God flooded the whole world. All the sinful people died except for Noah and his family and the animals that were on the ark. Eventually the water came down. Noah and his family got out. The animals got out, and man began to repopulate again. The next major event we hear in the Bible is the Tower of Babel, where we hear that Noah's descendants became a great many people, and they settled in this land called Shinar. And they said this. They said, we're going to build this tower that pokes right up in the heaven. We are going to make a name for ourselves, and we will not spread out over the earth. Now, there's something about those 3 things that God didn't like, and he said, I have to stop this. So God intervened, and what did he do? At that time, all the people on the earth are speaking one language. Now, remember, Adam and Eve came out speaking. They had a language given to them by God. They didn't have to learn it. So they all spoke this language that was given to them by God. Well, God confused their language, so nobody could understand each other. Everybody got frustrated, and they decided to split up, and they spread out, and filled the earth instead of staying in one place. The tower that they were building, they abandoned that and they called it the Tower of Babel because that's where everybody started to sound like they were babbling. Well, the next thing that we hear of is not so much a main event, but a main person in the Bible, and his name was Abram. Now, we're going to continue with Abram today. And the main thing about Abram that you need to know is it's about his faith in God. Okay, so what is faith? Faith, when you hear about faith in God, faith means that whatever God tells me, whatever God says, I believe it and I follow it. And whatever God tells me to do, I will follow it. Okay, and you do these things. That's having faith in God. So God came to this man named Abram, and he was married. He had a wife named Sarai, and he was 75 years old at the time. And God came to Abram and he said, listen, I'm God, and I want you, Abram, to move to this land that I'm going to show you where to go. Pick up where you're at and move. And if you do this for me, if you do the things that I tell you to do in your life, I will make it so that your descendants are countless as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the beach, and a great nation will come from you. And Abram listened to God. It was just a big test of faith. God said, look, you lived here your whole life. You're going to leave your home behind. You're going to just pick up and leave and go where I tell you to do. Abram did that. Great test of faith that Abram passed. So we're going to pick up from there. We're moving forward now in the Bible. Again, on teaching the Bible each week, we're going to move forward and we're going to discuss every main event that happens in the Bible as we move forward. So now we're going to hear about Abram and the birth of his two sons. Now, when God first appeared to Abram, he told him that he would give Abram and his wife Sarai children. So God appeared to Abram when he was 75 and his wife was 65 and said, if you do what I tell you to do, your descendants are going to be countless. Well, it's 10 years later now. Abram is now 85 and his wife Sarai was 75. They didn't have any children yet. And this was from Genesis chapter 16, verses 15. Sarai believed that God prevented her from having any children. So she decided, well, God promised us kids. It's not happening, so we need to take matters into our own hands. I guess God couldn't, in her mind, do what he said he was going to do. So Sarah had this idea that, hey, Abram, I don't think God's going to let me have children like he said he would, so you should take my servant Hagar and make her your second wife and have children with her. And Abram said, okay. So he took Sarai's servant Hagar, married her, slept with her, and she got pregnant with a son. And God told him, since she became pregnant, that you should name this son that you have with your second wife, Hagar, you should name this son Ishmael, and that's what they did. Now, having a second wife caused a lot of conflict between the first wife, Sarai, and the second wife, Hagar. Do you think? Having two wives usually is not a good idea. Yeah, I think they might fight a little bit. So, because of this, Sarai began to mistreat Hagar, who was her servant, but also Abram's second wife now. Now the angel of the Lord came to Hagar, who was miserable because of this. And he told Hagar that her son Ishmael would have countless offspring, but he himself would be a wild, rebellious man when he grew up. And you could read this in Genesis chapter 16. God appeared to Abram when he was 99 years old now. So this is like 14 years later. Okay, so when he was 85 and Sarai was 75, Sarai thought, well, God told us we're going to have kids. I guess you can't do it or won't do it, so you should have kids with my servant Hagar. Well, God comes back now 14 years later. Now Abram is 99. Sarai is 89. And God told Abram again that if he followed God, God would make a great nation from his descendants. Kings would be his offspring, and God would give them the land of Canaan as their everlasting possession. God made a covenant with Abram on this promise. For Abram's part, every male offspring would be circumcised throughout generations. Then God changed Abram's name to Abraham and his wife Sarai's name to Sarah. Now you see what will happen is many times in the Bible, not every time, but many times, when God decides to use somebody and the person agrees to cooperate with God, we have free will. God will never force you to do stuff. He'll ask you, and you have free will to do what he asks you or not. I would suggest you do it because you'll be greatly blessed. But when he asks people to do something, if they agree, a lot of times in the Bible they'll change their name. It's almost as if this is who you were before God, came into your life. Now you're working for me. You're doing things for me, and I love you, and you're a new person, so I'm giving you a new name. So God changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. God told Abraham that he would have a son with his wife Sarah, who was now 90. Now remember, they both thought, okay, well, you're 85 and I'm 75. We're too old. God can't give us children. God's coming back 14 years later saying, oh, really? You didn't think I could give you, Sarah, a son at 75? How about if I give you a son at 90 to show that I'm God and I can do whatever I say I'm going to do? And God told him that this son that Abram would have with Sarah when she was 90 would be the son that God would establish his covenant through of making a great nation. And as God said, the next year at age 90 and for Sarah and at age 100 for Abraham, Sarah had his son. They named the son Isaac. So that's in Genesis chapter 17, 18, and 21. Now, this is very important. What Abraham learned through experience was if God says something, if God makes a promise, he will keep it. Even if in a natural it looks like, how could this be? This looks impossible. He learned if God says he's going to do something, he can do it no matter what. He made all the laws of nature. He could change them. He could do miracles. And he learned that, wow, okay, God gave my wife a son at 90. And like he said he would. I thought that was impossible. But he did it, and he learned from this. You see how this comes in a big play very soon. Now, Isaac, as he grew as a young child, Hagar, Abraham's second wife, remained living with them, and with their other son, Ishmael. Sarah became jealous and commanded Abraham to put out Hagar and Ishmael, because Sarah did not want Ishmael to be an heir along with her son, Isaac. Abraham did not want to do this to his son Ishmael. God appeared to Abraham and told him that it was okay if he told Hagar and Ishmael that they needed to go. God promised Abraham that he would make a great nation out of Ishmael, because Ishmael was Abraham's offspring. Therefore, Abraham sent Hagar, his second wife, and Ishmael, his first son, away. God looked after and took care of both of them, and you could read that in Genesis chapter 21, verses 8 to 21. God puts Abraham to a great test. Now, my opinion is just my opinion, aside from anything Jesus did, because everything Jesus did was beyond compare. But aside from what Jesus did, as far as faith, I think that what Abraham does next is the biggest act of faith towards God in all the Bible. Okay, and I'll show you why now. So Abraham's son Isaac grew into an older boy. And Abraham and Sarah loved Isaac very much, of course. He was their son. Right now, he's their only son because they sent Ishmael away. God put Abraham to very difficult tests to see if Abraham would follow God faithfully. God told Abraham to take his son Isaac into the mountains, into the land of Moriah, and once they were there, to offer Isaac as a sacrifice to God, which means God said, Abraham, I want you to take your son Isaac up to this place I'm telling you to, and I want you to kill him for me as a sacrifice for me. Abraham listened to God and trusted that somehow he would make everything okay. Somehow he'd make everything okay. This is important. God promised Abraham that you will have countless descendants. Okay? And he said, your descendants are all going to come through Isaac. Now, Isaac didn't have any children yet. So, if God had Abraham kill Isaac to sacrifice him to God before Isaac had any children, it would be impossible for Isaac to produce these countless descendants for Abraham like God told him he would. Impossible in the natural. Just like it was impossible in the natural for his wife Sarah to give them a son at age 90. Abraham learned from that faith failure that he had that, wait a minute, if God promised something, even if I don't understand how this could possibly happen in the natural, if he said it, I'm going to trust him. And he trusted him on this biggest thing now. Take your only son that you have now and kill him, sacrifice him for me. So Abraham took his son Isaac, whom he loved very much, on the several-day journey to the place that God instructed him to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice. When they got there, Abraham bound Isaac, laid him on the altar that he made, and pulled out a knife to kill him like God instructed him to do. As Abraham lifted up his knife to kill Isaac, to sacrifice him to God, as God told him to do, God immediately appeared and yelled, "Abraham, Abraham!" And Abraham stopped and said, "Here am I." And God said to Abraham, this is so important, God said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Okay, it's very important. Okay, God considers this his only son, even though he has another one, because he's going to be the heir. So, but let me read this one more time. I'm going to read all the way through. This is what God said to Abraham. "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son." I said it twice. "Abraham, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your children and grandchildren as stars in the heaven and as the sand on the seashore. And in your children and grandchildren shall all the nations of the earth be blessed because you have obeyed my voice." God said that in Genesis 22, chapter 11 to 18. Now I want to give you something to think about here, okay? God said it twice to Abraham. "Because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me, I will do this for you." I want you to think about this. I don't know the answer, but I want you to think about it. Is it possible that because God was able to find just one man, one person, who was willing to not withhold his only son, but offer him up as a sacrifice for God, could that possibly have helped God decide to actually later not withhold his only son, but offer him up as a sacrifice for all of man? Because, let me rephrase that, because God found one man who loved God enough that he would give him his only son, but God stopped him from doing that. Did that prompt God to actually give up his only son for man to pay as a sacrifice for our sins? Something to think about. Okay? What Abraham did might have been even bigger than you realize. The faith of one man. Because Abraham trusted God and tried to do this most difficult task that God asked him to do, which is offer up his only son to God, would that make it, God would make it so that Abraham's children and grandchildren would be the ones to found the country of Israel. Additionally, kings would come from Abraham's offspring. You had King David, you had King Solomon, you had King Rehoboam and other kings. More importantly, Jesus Christ himself would later be one of the offspring of Abraham. Okay? Now remember, Jesus' father was God, but he had human parents on earth, Mary and Joseph. Okay, so now we're going to hear about, so Isaac, he missed that, dodged that bullet, okay? Abraham didn't sacrifice him, and Isaac now grew up. And he is free to have these descendants that God promised Abraham that that would form a great nation. So we're going to hear about Isaac's first two descendants. He has two sons named Esau and Jacob. Now Abraham's son Isaac grew into a man, and he married a woman named Rebekah. Rebekah was unable to have any children, so Isaac prayed to God that he would grant them children. God answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twin sons. The sons fought with each other inside of Rebekah's womb. She asked God why this is so. God answered her prayer and answered her question. God told Rebekah, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. That was in Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. That's where God said that. Now at the twins' birth, Esau came out first. Esau was covered in red hair, and they named him Esau. Second one came out holding Esau's heel. Remember, they're fighting in the womb, and when Esau came out in birth, the second was grabbing his heel. They named the second one Jacob. Jacob means trickster. Okay, you'll see how this comes into play soon. Now, as they grew up, Esau became an outdoorsman and a skilled hunter, while Jacob was a quiet man who dwelled in tents. Isaac loved Esau more because of the food he hunted, but Rebekah loved Jacob more. you're going to see in this family line here, starting with Isaac, and you'll see through Jacob, and the parents love openly love sons more than other sons, and it causes huge problems. Don't do that. If you have children, love them all the same. You might have to treat them differently because of what they do, but you love them all the same. But here, they openly love some more than others, and you see the problems it caused. So one day, again, Jacob and Isaac are grown up now. They're older. One day, Jacob was cooking stew. Esau came in and was very hungry, and he asked Jacob for some stew. Jacob said, yeah, I'll give you some stew, but only if you give me your birthright for it. I want your birthright for it, or else I won't give you any stew. And Esau thought and said, what good's my birthright? I feel like I'm starving to death. Who cares? All right, you have my birthright. Give me some stew. What good's a birthright to me if I starve to death? Now, I don't think he was starving to death, but it says here, thus Esau despised his birthright. That's in chapter 25, verse 34. Esau didn't think very much of his birthright to trade it for a bowl of stew. Now, over time, their father Isaac became very old and he grew blind. He believed that he might die soon. So he called his firstborn son Esau, who he loved more, but he's also a firstborn son. He came out earlier. And he told him to go and hunt to make a meal out of it for him. And afterward, Isaac would give him the blessing due to the firstborn son. Isaac's wife Rebekah overheard this conversation. She told Jacob what his father said to his brother Esau. Remember, she loved Jacob more. Isaac loved Esau more. And Rebekah gave Jacob these following instructions. She told Jacob to go out and get 2 young goats from their flock. She would make a meal out of them. And she said, Jacob, you are to give them as Isaac to your father. And since he's blind, he's going to think that you're Esau. And he's going to give you the blessing instead of the one he promised to Esau. Jacob didn't think this was a good idea. He said, Mom, Esau's hairy. I'm very smooth. If he touches me at all, he's going to know that I'm not Esau, that I'm Jacob. And instead of blessing me, he's going to curse me for trying to trick him out of a blessing. Well, Rebekah, their mom, kept reassuring him, and she basically said, just do what I tell you to do. And Jacob did. So Rebekah made this meal, and she dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes so he would smell like Esau. And she put animal pelts on his arm, animal fur, so that if Jacob reached out and touched him, he'd feel hairy, so he'd feel like Esau. Now, when Jacob brought the food to Isaac and asked for the blessing for the firstborn son, Isaac, who was blind, he said, You don't sound like Esau. You sound like Jacob. Let me touch you. And he reached down, he touched his arm, and he felt the animal fur. And he said, you sound like Jacob, but you smell and you feel like Esau. And Jacob convinced him, I'm Esau. I'm your son Esau. You told me to do this. How would I know how to do this, to go out and hunt and bring this? I am here for my blessing. So I guess it convinced Isaac. Isaac gave Jacob the blessing now that was meant for the firstborn son Esau. And this was the blessing Isaac gave to Jacob. Isaac said, May God give you the dew of heaven and the fattest of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. That's in Genesis chapter 27, verses 26 to 29. You might have heard a saying, blessed are those who bless Israel, and cursed are those who curse Israel. This is where it originally came from, because you'll see very soon Jacob will be the first person to form the country of Israel. Now, as soon as Jacob received this blessing from his father Isaac and he left, his brother Esau came in. Remember, Isaac sent Esau out. He said, go hunt, make some food for me, and I'll give you the blessing. So he prepared his father a meal, and he brought it to him, and he asked for the firstborn blessing. Isaac got terrified. He said, who are you? I already got a meal from Esau, and I already gave him my blessing. Esau said, I'm your son. And he realized what happened. He said, Jacob tricked me. And he cried out in bitter agony for a blessing from his father. But Isaac said, I can't give you a blessing. I already gave it to Jacob, and I made Jacob Lord over you. And I don't have another blessing for you, Esau. I gave the one I have for the firstborn son to Jacob. But Esau kept crying and begging for a blessing. And this is what Isaac said to Esau. Isaac said, Behold, away from the fattest of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword shall you live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. And Isaac said in Genesis chapter 27, verses 39 to 40. Esau hated Jacob because they tricked their father Isaac into giving him the firstborn blessing that belonged to Esau. Esau said that after his father dies, he's going to kill his brother Jacob. Now Rebekah found out about Esau's intentions. So she sent Jacob to live with her brother Laban in the land of Haran until Esau's anger hopefully subsides. And that's from Genesis chapter 27, verses 36 to 46. Now Esau later went on and married a daughter of Ishmael, the first son of Abraham in Hagar that was cast out. God came to Jacob in a dream and told him that he made a promise to his grandfather Abraham that his descendants would be many and would form a great nation. And it's going to start with Jacob's sons. Now, Jacob doesn't have any sons. Well, Jacob was living with his uncle Laban, and Laban was more of a manipulator than his mom was, than he was. Jacob fell in love with Laban's daughter, who I guess was his cousin, and her name was Rachel. And he said, Uncle Laban, I want to marry your daughter Rachel. And Laban said, okay, but to marry my daughter, you have to work for me for 7 years first. And if after 7 years of working for me, I will give you permission to marry her. So he did. He worked for 7 years. And on the wedding day, Jacob's getting ready to marry Rachel. Laban brings out her older sister, Leah. You're going to marry her. Jacob said, what are you talking about? We agreed that I'm going to marry Rachel. What are you talking about? He said, well, a technicality. In my family, it's the custom that the oldest daughter must get married first. So if you want to marry one of my daughters, you have to marry Leah. If you want to still marry Rachel, you can, but you have to work another 7 years to marry her. So he did, resentfully. But now he married two sisters, okay? First one was Leah, which he was tricked into, and then he worked 7 more years and married Rachel. Now, through these two women, he had 12 sons who would go on to form the 12 tribes of Israel. The first 10 he had with Leah, second 2 he had with Rachel, and Leah and Rachel were always fighting over this because it's like a love triangle. It was very bad, and you see how this comes into play too, how he had 10 with Leah and then 2 with Rachel. This will come into play with the next time we meet with Joseph. Now God came to Jacob one night in the form of a man, and Jacob began to wrestle with this man. Jacob and God wrestled all night long. When God saw that Jacob would not give up, he touched Jacob's hip socket and caused it to pop out of joint. This caused Jacob to limp for the rest of his life to remind him of the day he wrestled with God. Jacob would still not stop wrestling with God until God blessed him. God asked Jacob his name, and he said Jacob. And then God said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and men and have prevailed. So he changed his name from Jacob to Israel, and he would be the first person to form the country Israel. That was in Genesis chapter 32, verse 27-28. God finally blessed Jacob as he asked him to. God later appeared to Jacob and reaffirmed what he told Jacob on the night when they wrestled. God said to Jacob, again, your name is Jacob, no longer shall you be called Jacob, but now your name is Israel. I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. That was in Genesis chapter 35, verses 9 to 12. That's it for today. God bless all of you. Thank you. And when we meet next time, we'll start learning about one of Jacob's sons, Joseph. Take care.
Christ belongs to all people. He belongs to the whole world.
For 60 years, Billy Graham and his team took the message of Christ to the world.
Have you been born again?
Telecasts of Billy Graham crusades continue to reach millions.
कितने जानते हैं कि यदि हम वे कुछ काम करना नहीं सीखेंगे जिन्हें हम कठिन समझते हैं, तो हम कभी वो नहीं बनेंगे जो परमेश्वर की हमारे लिए इच्छा है। यदि आप मेरा प्रोग्राम देखते हैं तो आप जानते होंगे कि चाहे मुझे विश्वास है कि मैं बहुत प्रोत्साहित करती हूँ और मैं ये सिखाने में बहुत समय गुजारती हूँ कि परमेश्वर आपसे बहुत प्रेम करते हैं, उनकी आपके जीवन के लिए एक बढ़िया योजना है और आप मसीह में कौन है, परंतु जॉयस माय मिनिस्ट्रीज में हर वक्त मिष्ठान नहीं मिलता। हम ढेर सारा मीट और बेस्वाद सब्जियां परोसते हैं जो आपकी प्रभु में बढ़ने और शक्तिशाली बनने में मदद करेगी। हम चाहते हैं कि आप पपया की तरह बने और पालक खाएं। आमीन। इब्रानियों 12:11। वर्तमान में हर प्रकार की ताड़ना आनंद की नहीं होती, पर शोक की ही बात दिखाई पड़ती है। तो भी पीछे, आप सब कहें पीछे, कहें बाद में, तो भी जो उसको सहते सहते पक्के हो गए हैं, पीछे उन्हें चैन के साथ धर्म का प्रतिफल मिलता है। बहुतायत फसल जिसमें धर्म शामिल होता है जब हम विचारों, उद्देश्यों और कार्यों में परमेश्वर की इच्छा का अनुपालन करते हैं, जिससे हम सही तरीके से जीते और परमेश्वर के साथ धर्मी ठहराए जाते हैं। उसके बाद वे असल में कहते हैं, इसीलिए ढीले हाथों और निर्बल घुटनों को सीधे करो, जो उनके कहने का मतलब है यदि परमेश्वर आपसे किसी चीज के बारे में निपट रहे हैं, यदि उन्होंने आपके कुछ खिलौने छीन लिए हैं, यदि वह आपको आपके आरामदेह छोटे मुलायम घरौंदे से बाहर निकाल रहे हैं और आपकी राह में कुछ कांटे आ रहे हैं, आप जान सकते हैं कि परमेश्वर आपसे किसी बात के बारे में निपट रहे हैं। और शायद कुछ ऐसी बात है जिसके लिए आपको शायद पहले दंड न मिला हो, परंतु अब आपको अनुभव होता है कि परमेश्वर आइंदा आपका वैसा व्यवहार सहन नहीं करेंगे। इसलिए अपना सर नीचे लटकाकर, कंधे झुकाकर घूमते रहने और बुरा अनुभव करने की बजाय आपको वो सब झाड़ कर प्रसन्न रहना होगा, क्योंकि चाहे ताड़ना उस वक्त अच्छी ना लगी जब हमें मिल रही हो, पर केवल वही हमारे जीवन में ऐसा कुछ उत्पन्न करती है जो हम चाहते हैं, परंतु अनुशासन के बिना कभी प्राप्त नहीं कर सकते। कोई बात नहीं, मैं समझ सकती हूँ कि कितने ये कहेंगे कि परमेश्वर इस वक्त पक्का आपके जीवन के व्यवहार संबंधित कुछ पक्षों के बारे में निपट रहे हैं या किसी अन्य चीज के बारे में। वो कठिन लगता है ना, जब आपको बहुत लंबे समय तक किसी बात के लिए दंड नहीं मिलता और परमेश्वर उस समय को छू नहीं